Delighted to say I'm joined today by Paul Perera. Paul has a history of being deeply involved in the aerospace industry, having formerly been a VP for technology at GKN Aerospace. Paul, I'd like to start off, if you would, by telling us what you're doing now. I mean, I know you've had a momentous year and it's moved on a bit from aerospace, but I know that you're still very connected to aerospace. What are you doing now?
So Nick, it's really a business that I've created off the back of the ventilator challenge, learning from diversifying aerospace into medical healthcare, making 14,400 ventilators from March through to June, to really propose that the technologies that we have in aerospace could be really valuable for a number of other reasons. And the one that we've just come to realize is a real problem is that many ICU nurses and doctors and consultants are being exposed to the coronavirus because their faces are different shapes to those of the standard in 1960 when people came along. So we created a business called MyMaskFit, using metrology solutions from aerospace, but also making them more accessible and being able to 3D print effectively a mask using a number of technologies and a digital supply chain that we're creating, so that people all over the world can achieve a really well-fitted, custom-fit FFP3 mask, which is medical grade.
Well, it seems very timely because it was only this week that we read about a whole batch of masks having to be rejected by the UK government because they did not fit. So let's drill a little bit more down into the inspiration for that. Obviously, the pandemic hit the beginning of the year. We then became locked down. So what was the genesis then of the start of this initiative for you?
So one of my friends from many years ago in Swansea, where I did my first bit of engineering together with him at 3M, his wife is an American who came over from Phoenix about 2 years ago, and they've been back in hospital regime where she trained in Phoenix, and came to Swansea where my parents live actually. And they turned up at my doorstep and said, look, I know you've got a 3D scanner in your house. Could we scan my face and could we try and make a mask that fits me? I said, well, that shouldn't be a problem. So the genesis is an ICU nurse with a real issue that she couldn't find masks in America to fit. She couldn't find them here to fit. And she was not able to actually work in the ward where she could serve patients in West Glamorgan. And in fact, set up the COVID ward, but then couldn't work in it. So Valerie has been my shoulder of customer whenever I need to say, does this work? Will it work in the environment? How do you recycle or reuse a mask? You know, one of the challenges we've taken to the table is there a possibility that we could bring a recyclable, sustainable mask into being? Because one of the biggest challenges right now is every single one of these NHS masks are being reused. Only once, if that. So, you know, if you look at the pile of CO2 we're about to burn and incinerate of these masks, that's quite horrific. And we've determined that every week in Wales today, 72,000 masks are used a week, which is the entire amount that was being used last year in a year. So we've got a huge stockpile of waste that we're building as we've got all this PPE. You just mentioned some of them don't fit. The idea of having a personalized mask and mass customization is the real aim here, not just for masks, but for many medical devices, will be that we'll be able to achieve a much slimmer supply chain, a leaner supply chain, a faster route to market effectively to get people what they need when they need it. But also importantly, there'll be a sense of ownership. You know, people will own their own mask. It will be theirs, it only fits them. So we've got a number of other facets to the sustainability piece. We've built in the thinking around a sustainable filter, because the filters are the bit that's still a commodity, if you like, in a respirator mask. And we're looking at putting copper in that, and that copper will kill the virus over a short period of time. So that doesn't need to be replaced so often. So we're looking at it from all angles: sustainability, industry 4, and also obviously comfort of the patients and the carers.
Paul, as you know, the call to action that we've initiated here at NCW is about engaging the aerospace and defense sector more deeply in global challenges. To what extent, if any, does MyMaskFit have any reach back into aerospace? And perhaps you could just describe that connection, if you will.
No, okay. So the germs of the consortia we built around even the ventilator challenge were hugely related to aerospace. We pulled in fact, I pulled in Rolls-Royce and Airbus, and we got the Formula One teams working together. But in the aerospace community, the great thing is there's a willingness to do some really interesting things. So we have a lot of the companies that support aerospace working on MyMaskFit as it happens. So we've got companies from CAD companies like Autodesk, and we've got other companies coming in like RS Components who support the aerospace industry. And what they see in this is that this isn't about creating just a mask. This is about creating an entirely new supply chain, and thinking about that supply chain being more sustainable and ready to call to action for maybe defense, maybe for aerospace, but be there in a different shape post the pandemic. And I think one of the things that's encouraging is that it's not just the large companies, the small companies in aerospace are also looking at what we're doing. We've had the university supporting us from Swansea. We've had Birmingham, we've had King's College London. We've now got Cambridge working with us. So I think there's an ecosystem around aerospace that's pretty common to many of the challenges that we should be looking to solve. And I think the biggest challenge that we've got to solve is sustainable aviation in the industry. And many of these companies are looking at this and saying, okay, so there are some aspects of what you're doing here. 3D printing is a huge way to save a lot of waste. There's a lot more to do on that. In fact, Baker Hughes and the team have been working with me to see if they can't help using their inspection technologies, which came from aerospace and will go back into aerospace to advance their thinking. So I'm getting a lot of goodwill, got a lot of support and a lot of backers to move from aerospace to healthcare, and I'm sure we'll all be back soon.
Well, it's fantastic, and I've been engaged in this whole area of trying to engage and mobilize aerospace and defense in this very field, in global challenges. I mean, obviously, you have started to address one of them, and it's stemmed and flowed from a crisis that we've had, the pandemic. You touched on there this idea of resilience through a flexible supply chain. And I think that sits at the heart of how our industry, not just aerospace industry, but our industry itself is able to adapt and change to global challenges as and when they emerge. Can you say a little bit more about the supply chain dynamics as you see them, how they can be flexible and flux, if you like, to ebb and flow according to the demands of the day? And some of those demands may, of course, be pop-up crises, such as the one that we've had this year.
So what I think is essential to remember is there's probably three challenges in the aerospace industry today. We're very regulated. So is healthcare, by the way, and very similar in their regulation. Two, we are quite difficult to mobilize, even in times of challenge like we have with ventilators. We really did struggle to find some people in the supply chain to do what we needed to do. We had to go all over the world. I mentioned scouring lots of suppliers, and I think 28 countries came to bear to produce some of the parts of the ventilators. We don't have all those resources, particularly here in the UK, and with trade barriers, we're losing some of those abilities to get access to new parts of the supply chain. And and the third one is we're moving to new technologies in aerospace. We've got hydrogen coming along, and I've got a lot to say about that one. But we've got new needs that we didn't know of before. So a marketplace basically tackles all three of those. It creates the ability to be an open platform for suppliers to see how they can see a demand changing in a rapid way, be able to reconfigure, repurpose their business, and be more resilient in the way that they respond and be there, whether it be a crisis or not. And I think one of the biggest crises we face, as you've mentioned, Nick, is climate change. I don't think that COVID relative to climate change is anything. And that's why my biggest passion really behind all of this is there's a huge new opportunity. We started off actually 10 years ago at Rolls-Royce when I was working there. looking to hydrogen. I've been pushing that quite hard with the government in the UK and elsewhere. And we now see the embers, I think, of a new industry burning hydrogen or consuming hydrogen rather than kerosene. The opportunity is to take that marketplace, reconfigure it for hydrogen-powered aircraft, and that will be a very different way of working. And I think we'll see multiple iterations and derivatives of defense programs very quickly and rapidly. We've seen that through the Ministry of Defense Rapid Capability Office, but we'll see that too in the evolution or revolution of sustainable aviation. We're going to see multiple different derivatives of zero emissions aircraft, from small growing to larger very quickly.
So hydrogen, clearly a huge shift for aviation. I know you wanted to talk about something having changed in the air. Does hydrogen presumably go to the heart of that, or are there other factors that have changed in the air for aerospace in the past year or so?
Yeah, I mean, the title, I like something that's changing in the air because we really do notice it everywhere we walk, when we look to the skies. I think that the industry is about to revolutionize around three things again. The first one is, passengers aren't going to be flying the way that they were before. Business travel is going to move to a different sort of way and pace of traveling. We're not going to be always jumping on the plane for those meetings any longer. We're going to get used to these Zooms and these MS Teams and whatever else we come up with, and I have some other ideas on that. But second, the industry is really, with its cash drain throughout, losing capabilities in some areas, and we will need to think about how we make them more resilient. And we will need to constantly think, when we make them more resilient, are they sustainable? I mean, in the manufacturing processes, we really need to be sustainable too. And that's why I go back to things like additive manufacturing. And the third area, I think, is that, let's take a deep breath, because we really need to think about how we curtail some of our own flying. We've got to stop the demand. We have to personally take on a responsibility to say no and not travel. And I may have been one of those people that would have jumped on a plane in a minute's notice, as my wife reminded me. That's how I was quite often, to do something that could have been done from the luxury of my living room or office. So I think there's a number of factors there, but really to the heart of it, I think the aerospace industry is going to have to reconfigure massively around sustainable aviation. Is it all about hydrogen? Certainly not. But is it about something quite different? Hydrogen is going to be challenging. And I think that the UK really is well positioned, not just in the production of the propulsion system, which is obviously essential for the demand, in the tanking, the storage, the distribution. We've got all the composites. We've got the research centers like the AMRC, the MTC, the NCC, combined forces of high-value manufacturing catapults. They really can bring those ideas to market far quicker if we really leverage them. As we've seen in the ventilator challenge, we use them all. I think we have the opportunity with other really novel technologies. Ammonia has been mentioned a few times, and I know our friends at Reaction Engine very well working on something along those lines, which may work for a single fuel for defense, for example. We could see a multiple set of measures to get to decarbonization. The one thing I question myself is, how do you make it economic? Because it's got to be business minded, it's got to be economic to the airlines. And I think I looked at the SAF option, which is the sustainable aviation fuels. Typically, SAF is created today by bringing hydrogen, capturing carbon, and bring the two together through a Fischer-Tropsch process. So whether we want to keep the current fuels and drop-in fuels being e-kerosene or whatever we want to call it, an e-fuel, we still need hydrogen as part of the roadmap. So I think whichever way we go, hydrogen is going to be there. If we've got ammonia, hydrogen is available. So you're in actually bigger quantities and can be stored better. So I don't think hydrogen is the only answer, but I think it's the core. And I think the UK has to take this opportunity in the global world to be the leaders. And I don't know, I've looked at the comprehensive spending review, or the spending review of yesterday, the day before. I've looked at the way in which we've tackled our hydrogen strategy so far. And I have to say, I think we're really being put to the bottom of the ranks in the world in tackling hydrogen properly. The likes of France, Germany, Spain, Japan, Australia, South Korea, Portugal, even Italy last week, produced a hydrogen strategy before we have. And I'm conscious that I'm probably being provocative, but for a good reason. I think the UK still, at this moment, can advance in this area, but we do need the knowledge and the ability to exercise our pathways to hydrogen expedited in ventilator timescales. We really need to move now. And I'm very, very worried about where we are, because not only do we lose the opportunity to produce the next power generation system and help Rolls-Royce and others in the UK that feed off that wonderful, emblem of an engine. Maybe it won't be an engine, maybe it will be a fuel cell, who knows? But whatever the form of transport into the system as a storage mechanism, hydrogen may well be the perfect opportunity for the supply chain to rally around. And the second thing is, we have wings that are filled with kerosene. Tomorrow, if the hydrogen aircraft come along, there's no kerosene in them. So the whole wing design becomes something of a different beast. And it may well end up being designed and built in another country, because the French and the Germans would love to have access to that. The Spanish already do. And then you've got, all the fuel systems which are produced here in the UK for Airbus. Well, where will they go if they're all hydrogen? My concern here is, for now, right this moment, Airbus has said they're going to go to hydrogen. They will. There are 3 other companies I know of in the UK that are desperate to move into hydrogen on their aircraft as well. And, support isn't coming quickly enough. I know there's a good study going on through the Aerospace Technology Institute, but my question is, can we accelerate even that, the ventilator timescales, and get a better decision on which pathway is going to move quickly? And then should we be starting to think about who we're going to team with? Because this can't be achieved just by the UK alone. There are some great countries out there that are already teaming. So Germany and Australia are teaming on their hydrogen production and hydrogen consumption model. Where's our team for hydrogen? We've got the biggest offshore wind capacity of any country that I can think of. And we've got the ability to put the hydrogen production as an export to the UK. So I sort of stand on a bit of a high horse. And why would we just put hydrogen into our heating systems, which is the current pathway? To burn the most expensive resources that we could find directly into carbon in heating, when you've got hard to abate sectors like aerospace and heavy goods vehicles, maybe trains and in fact ships. Those are places where we need to be looking. So maybe it's not just in the air, it's on the ground as well, Nick. But I guess the question I've got is, how do we move faster? How do we move with those timescales of ventilators, masks, and take that innovation back into our industry so that we can be at the heart of the future? Because it's going to happen. It's going to happen for the good reason that we need it.
Well, there's a lot to unpick and unpack there, but one of the things I just want to touch on before we close is the role that aerospace and defence can play, possibly as a sort of facilitator and integrator in systems and systems of systems terms in wider global initiatives against other global challenges. But the problem, or the challenge, I guess, as you would know only too well, is aerospace and defense is a strange beast. It is commercial, but it's not commercial. It largely depends on the whims and the directional impetus of government to sort of formulate where it goes. So I wonder how, and if you have any ideas on how that circle is squared. In other words, government has to make direction, but aerospace too has to become more commercial. How do we do that?
So we've got the great opportunity. I think we've got the best proximity between government and the industry. We've got the AGP, which Colin Smith chairs right now and has the ability to get into government at the top levels and really influence the thinking. Equally, we've got a very warm ministerial team and BAYS team, particularly, who are looking towards the UK's industry to come together and shape and reshape the future. So I'm actually very positive about that relationship. I think that quite the biggest challenge of all of us now is making the business economic sense of it, as you talked about. Unless that's there, it's difficult. How many jobs do we create? How many new industries do we spur off that could be exportable? How do we put the confidence back in when actually for an industry we're at the ebb of the lowest tide? We've got to try and restore that revolution of thinking that came from the depths of the wars. And then we are in a war. I think Prince Charles has said think of this coronavirus pandemic as just the start of a war on climate change. We need to sort out our real determined effort, common purpose, but the business will follow that purpose. I think if we can all align, and I think there is a good alignment, and that's what we learned on the ventilator challenge. Most industry players and even some academics, I think, are probably pushing us harder than ever before in the right direction. So I have a good feeling about this. I think that we have to start sooner rather than later. We need to move with some pace. We need to concentrate on the community that sits around aerospace as well as the core players today. I think that the learning point I had in the ATI Boeing Accelerator, which I'm part of, is that what comes from those startups is also very valuable. They've experimented and tried out stuff that big organizations just purely wouldn't take the risk on. But they've got the great ideas, maybe haven't got all the financial way, but together, what a combination. You've got industry, you've got government backing that with the ATI, you've got Boeing in there, which is interesting to bring Boeing into the UK a little bit more. It's fantastic. You've got Rolls-Royce now joining that team. You've got the MOD in there. And we talk about defense. I think defense could be a real test case for how we can make this work. And I feel passionate about serving our armed forces in the way that we're trying to serve the NHS. So maybe that's my next challenge, Nick. But I'd love to move quite quickly to build out the hydrogen infrastructure for the UK, because that has to be a precursor. So one of the things I've asked a couple of airports, and I was on the phone yesterday with one of them, is to start moving themselves towards hydrogen, even in a small way. Let's put buses into airports that are based on hydrogen. At least then you start thinking about how you handle it on the apron. Then we're ready to produce the hydrogen valleys. The consumption will start happening, even in a small way. But let's make those pathways really simple, easy. Let's start moving one step at a time. But then once we've got the momentum, and I think the voice and the communication about hydrogen this week, it's been Hydrogen EU week. And I think that one of the things I've learned is the rest of Europe has picked this up and they're throwing a lot of weight behind it. But we can do just the same, but we just need to get the voice out there. And I've got a consortium I'm building right now around hydrogen and the demand, not just in aerospace, but across all sectors. And I hope that we can bring a call to action, just like we did with the ventilators, to pick up and move this ball on with government. I'm hopeful that the Hydrogen Advisory Council will listen. And I'm hopeful that we will make the first steps to not just delivering a strategy in a book and something that sits on the shelf, but in reality, in Q1 next year, when we promise that the hydrogen strategy will land. And then aerospace has got the Fly Zero program that will pull forward those roadmaps, and we'll have an aircraft demonstration program within, I hope, 2 or 3 years. And we will then be in a position where we can really, really lead the world in what could be the most exciting future in the fourth revolution of aerospace. And I think we're here with the best technologies in the world. I feel confident that we can do something with it. The passion's here. We can make a really sustainable future in aviation, which I guess is one of my aims to leave as a legacy for my 5 children.
Paul, a couple more quick questions. One relates to the fact that it has long been my belief, certainly, that the aerospace and defense products that you see, that the platforms essentially, but the systems that go on them as well, are in a crude sense the tip of an iceberg, and the iceberg extends many levels, depths below the level of the waterline, and that is full of science and technology and know-how and skills that have been built up over generations, in effect, in aerospace, but sort of just lie latent there in many respects. That is a government-paid asset. It is a taxpayer-paid asset. But I often wonder whether the government is even aware that it sits there, sort of undrawn down or undrawn up. And is that something that you're aware of? And is there a mechanism, do you think, by which government, because of course aerospace and defense particularly only move when government directs it to, it needs to be pulled out on some direction by government. Is that an issue, do you think?
So skills is one of my little hobby horses as well. I'm on the board of Ingenuity, where we're basically trying to build STEM skills across various sectors, but aerospace is a core of that. Why? Because it's as you've mentioned, we actually have some really highly capable skills in aerospace that are as you say, also demographically being challenged. We've got many people, I think these next few days will be leaving Airbus UK because of the redundancy programs or the early retirement programs that they're taking. Where is all that knowledge disappearing to? How do we capture it? And one of the things that I've been doing is actually leveraging on those people that have been on furlough on my projects and things like that. And I'm thinking, well, if they've got the desire, and I think many of them do, they'd love to continue doing something really for the cause. What would be great is to start converting some old aircraft into zero emissions aircraft with those capabilities. We have the opportunity right now to do that and demonstrate that in the UK. I mean, in fact, the UK government bought the 146 for Airbus that then was turned into EFAN X. We've got a flying test bed. We paid for that as taxpayers. It's no longer in service. It's beautifully adaptable. You could drop hydrogen in, ammonia in there. We could actually start using all that talent that resides and maybe currently on the sidelines for the moment to go and build a hydrogen-powered aircraft today. We could start. And I think we would take very little government resources to do so. A lot of commitment from these people who are really keen to leave their legacy like I'm trying to leave mine, to bring that knowledge to the table right now. So I think a practical challenge like that is something the government could lay down a small amount of money, but get a huge amount of knowledge captured. And I hope Fly Zero is the mechanism for that, but I haven't yet seen it. And I know it will come because the team there is great, and they're working to build their 100 odd people out right now. But really, we need to get moving because 100 people isn't enough to survive the next 4 or 5 years when the knowledge drain will happen. People will move into other industries, and that's okay. But the industries they may move into may not be the high value added industries that we know of in aerospace. So I think the challenge is, where do we move those people to? Ingenuity is looking at that right now and thinking about how do you bring the capabilities up a level, maybe transfer them across sectors. The idea of a marketplace of brains is kind of in my mind here. How do we create that more peer-to-peer way of working? In the creative industries, that's happening. So why can't we do that with engineering and the talent around scientists that bring some real creativity and mobility in the marketplace for people?
Lastly, and again, you've touched on this, whilst of course right now the industry is losing people, in the future it will need to recruit again. And I'm turning my mind now to the millennial and Generation Z generations, which must once again start to populate the A&D industry when it starts to sort of re-emerge out of its present crisis. I wonder what your feelings are on all that we've talked about, which is it's an inspirational agenda. I wonder whether you feel that if that is sort of integrated into aerospace and defense, woven into the fabric of it, that it will become more appealing to new generations who want to come in, who seem to be much more environmentally minded than, say, my generation, to my shame, or to my generation's shame. So, and of course, then that has some kick attached to it in innovation terms, because the new generation brings with it all its new thinking. How do we do that, do you think?
So I think we need role models. We need significant, examples of how people with diverse backgrounds come to the table. I mean, I'm a Sri Lankan hybrid with a Welsh family, and I lived in Australia. The diversity of my education has led me to be quite innovative in my approach. Sometimes at a distance from the way in which the traditional UK education system would bring someone up. I think we need to appeal to many more people than we currently do. It can't be just the white middle class, the person who's come from a background of an engineer as a father before. We have seen actually in the last couple of years, particularly in GK and Aerospace where I was, that diversity being our key strength, and having something different in the community around aerospace is starting to happen. And I would imagine that in the next 2 to 3 years, my eldest son is 21. He's a history and politics student at first class from Manchester, but he can't find a job right now. I mean, it's a strange situation. But how do we retrain, reskill some of these great minds to do something that might solve a real global challenge? I think the only way to do that is to cause an effect. And I've got a great example. So whilst I'm building masks, and we've seen a number of solutions that have been developed by a competition in America called X Prize. X Prize is a small amount of, I think, philanthropists who are probably multi-billionaires put their money on the table and said, right, you are the next generation of engineers and scientists. Design us a mask that solves these challenges, doesn't fog up my glasses, doesn't make me feel uncomfortable, you know, it is fun to wear. Why don't we engage for a little bit of money a number of the community in that kind of, how do we call it, peer-to-peer model? That the students across the world are communicating with each other using the CAD tools that are common. They're actually integrating their designs. They're presenting them on YouTube. They've never left their bedrooms, but they're learning design skills. They're learning CAD skills. They're learning engineering, manufacturing. Some of the manufacturers are coming on, like, you know, filter manufacturers, teaching them how to make the design compatible with their filters. You know, wouldn't it be good for a small amount of effort to create some global challenges that we in the UK can lead upon, and maybe even do this in the UK in the first instance? So Nick, I'd love to help you do one of those, and I'm sure I could put some money on the table if you would like to as well.
Well, I think that's a great and inspirational way. It certainly inspired me, inspirational way on which to end, Paul. Look, thank you so much for talking to me and to us today. And I wish you all the very best with all your work, which is truly inspirational. Thank you.
I think it's just the beginning, Nick. I hope we get to work together a lot more, and thank you for the time.
I look forward to it. Cheers, Paul.